My name is Francis. I'm kind of whatever. Actually, I came here for an answer, but looks like I still haven't got that answer. I'm looking at your title there. It says growth, values, and welfare, right? And the Singapore model is very different. You know, in Singapore, I think, but for about 2 years ago, welfare has been a dirty word. Right from our independence, 50 years ago, welfare is bad. It's bad because it reduces incentives. That's the message I've been getting all the time, right? That if everybody got equal, why is there a motive to work? So this has been ground in us over maybe until 48 years ago. 2 years ago, we've kind of relaxed a little bit about welfare and giving more to the old and the less well-off. So that's my question is, how do you do it? You gave me some answers about trust, but fine, Norway, people trust each other. How do you develop that if that's one of the answers? Now, talking about growth as well, again, Singapore says if you want growth, you must have inequality. That's go hand in hand. That's like a negative correlation. And again, we've been preached upon that you know, we have to have inequality because without inequality, there will be no growth. And that message has been ground in us over and over and over again. You've got to accept the inequality because so your taxes are low, so the people at the top can have the incentive to come in here because we're a global society, and therefore to create businesses for the rest of society. Again, you guys seem to have growth despite the fact you have no welfare, despite the fact that the growth, the inequality in the Norwegian countries is so much lower, something like 25, and we're something like 45. You know, that's the kind of difference we have in inequality. So what is the answer? I still haven't got that answer, you know. How do you do it and we have to do it a different way? It's not that yours is better than ours. Maybe it is. I'm not so well prepared to say. But we haven't achieved what you guys have done, despite the fact that our models are so
But Francis, they've been doing this for 300 years. Right?
Maybe that's the answer. I don't know. So where is the answer?
We've been at many wars with each other.
Yeah. In my class, that's true. In one of the classes I teach, is that war is an important contributor to state building capacity. States become more effective when they have to fight wars, interstate wars. Anyway, Kuan or Tom.
Yeah, just to how to do it. As Tormod was into. To build the country. When we speak to elderly in Sweden, you know, we have the right to our pension. We did build this country, and you know, it was extremely honorable to be a hard-working person. And when the welfare state sort of grew up, this kept going. To actually use the system was a little bit of a shame. To use the welfare system in a very sort of extensive way. And that has developed throughout the years. So of course we have seen abuse of the system, absolutely. But then it comes a shift. Okay, we put more resources into checks and balances for the welfare system, so that everybody feels confident. Well, we trust that this welfare system is just and fair, and therefore we are ready to pay high taxes. We see that the money that we put into the system come out sort of in a proper way to those who needs it. But clearly so, it's always a balance when it comes to incentives and so on. And coming into inequality or equality. As you say, we have good figures when it comes to the Gini coefficient. And it brings the extra add-on for I do believe when it comes to innovation and creativity, everybody should have their chance of doing things. But clearly so also. We've had that debate in Sweden many times. You know, how big should the gap be between a working person and a non-working person? And if it comes too close, people do not intend to start search for new jobs as quick as if the welfare system provided a bit lower. So it's just. Any financial department would have good levels in counting in that. You can see it very clearly. But I think people trust the system.
And part of the reason people trust the system is because it's well designed. You pay attention to incentives. You make sure that it's not so generous as to deplete work incentives, but at the same time does provide some basic social safety protection.
And then also experience shows that people are sort of less simplistic than just saying that if I can get 5,000 staying at home and I can get 6,000 for working, I'd rather stay at home. People want to work and take part in society for other reasons than their paycheck. You know, it gives you social status, give you interaction, give you position.
Meaning.
So it's not only a monetary issue.
Incentives.
I think.
Right. Earlier, Tormund, you were talking in the briefing. You were talking about the education system and the emphasis on egalitarian access, and that it's not an elitist education system. Do you think that is part of one of the reasons for this high levels of social trust and the ability of everybody to want to participate?
Well, it is certainly a part of the reason why we have relatively few sort of really social divides in our countries. I think, of course, there's differences. Of course, there are rich people and poor people, and differences are increasing, albeit from a low starting point. But I think the education system plays a very important role. I mean, historically, that has been the #1 factor in sort of taking Norway from not long ago, from a sort of fisher and farmer society, very poor, one of the poorest in Europe, poorer than my good friends the Swedes, until what you see today. Education for all, I mean, that's been absolutely instrumental.
Barry? I mean, Denmark was also, until recently, mostly an agricultural economy.
I was an agrarian country. Well, it's a very good question how to do it. I don't think there's one simple answer. But if I relate it a little bit to how I perceive the debate here in Singapore these days, I think one question that you have, one premise is maybe what is ultimate success? When you ask how to do it, do what? Because obviously for us it has not been a goal for the individual to achieve ultimate richness, because you don't do that in any of our countries, I think. And I think part of how do we do it is then to have other value systems that gives us that satisfaction in both economic terms as individuals, both in our life quality, in our professional quality and achievement. And I think it's a very complex and very philosophical answer maybe, but I think some of the answers are in that satisfaction of your daily life, of your working life, and I think one thing which is important is that in our countries we could never achieve what we have achieved if we did not empower the whole hierarchy. So that is really, and I think that is also some of the differences. I mean, that's a cultural thing, that in a workplace in Denmark we would never be innovative if we expected innovation to come from the top. It would never happen. And that's not because we have bad leaders. It's just simply because it doesn't work like that. And the so I think that is relatively important. And I think that I was thinking about also the way that we have these coalition governments, and you wonder. I mean, we wonder sometimes how we actually take decisions, honestly. But I think actually also it comes back to education, and maybe it's if we empower the voters to elect the politicians. We sometimes say you have the politicians you deserve. Because we cannot just say, well, they're the government, they decide. Because we elected them. And if we are unsatisfied, we have to invest ourselves in the public debate, we have to get into politics, or we have to vote for the political party that we believe has some of the right answers. So that's empowerment. And I think what we try to do in many of our countries, and that is also part of that question. I know this is not the answer, because I don't think there is one answer. I think if I had the answer, I would not be ambassador, I would be consultant in some way.
Thank you. Susanna?
Yes, hello, my name is Susanna and I'm an RA at the school. So during your discussion, I looked up the immigration statistics of your respective countries. It's from the IOM, yeah? So in Denmark it's 9.9%, in Norway 12%, and in Sweden 15.9%, which is quite high, I think, in each of these countries.
The proportion of immigrants in your society.
So my question is that how does this relatively high rate of immigration influence the Nordic model, both in a positive and maybe in a negative way?
Since Vivian is there, go ahead, Vivian, with your question.
Thanks, Donald. Vivian Liu from Philanthropy Works and also one of the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders. So I would appreciate the ambassador's comments on sustainable development in general, and in particular, how, given research and given the statistics that that lady had just cited, now research had shown that countries which are more homogeneous tend to have policies that are more generous in terms of having in mind the greater good of the population. In your experience, is this true for your respective countries? I also have just one more question for Your Excellency Tormod. I read an article that Norway had dealt with its oil riches and the effect of inflationary pressures, wage inflationary pressures on the rest of the economy. So I thought it was kind of similar to the effects of the financial sector here in Singapore, as well as the real estate sector before some cooling happened. In the case of Norway, what I read, and I would love your views on whether this is true, what I read was that the government had taken some measures to basically prop up wages in the non-oil sector so that you don't have this massive distortionary effect of your best people going to the oil sector. Please comment. Thank you.
First, the question on homogeneity and how, to what extent does the Nordic model, the Nordic welfare states, rely on relatively homogeneous populations? And how is immigration changing that? Tormod, you want like to start, and then maybe Berit?
Well, I can give it a start. It's a good question. It's a difficult challenge, I think, for all of our countries, because I mean, it's a pretty fundamental fact that you tend to trust more your people close to you, the people like yourself. I mean, we could wish it was different, but this is a fundamental fact, I think, for all human beings. So when you have a larger proportion of immigrants, I think you have to rely more on sort of institutional trust and that sort of personal trust, and it makes it even more important to build good systems and to make sure that the distribution of the welfare state benefits and so on are conceived by all to be fair and appropriate. And this is not without challenges, and we have debates certainly in all of our countries, I think, that is sort of going, oh, why should this people from country X and Y have all these benefits and all that? This is part of the popular debate, absolutely.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I find sometimes when I listen to the debate in Denmark, you should think that the percentage was more than 10%. So I'd actually say, well, it's only 10%, and definitely it comes with some challenges, and it's a huge political, depending on where you are on the political spectrum, you have different opinions on this. I think one of our challenges has been integration. It has been to see immigrants as a resource and to understand how do we integrate them in our education system. We had in the 60s a lot of immigrants coming from Turkey, many of which maybe in their own language did not write or read. And years after maybe realized that we had a group of the immigrants that had not learned to speak Danish, which is a problem if you live in Denmark, because that's our national language, and maybe stayed at home, catered for the children. In Denmark, every child goes to a childcare. That's part of our upbringing. That's also where we learn some of our social skills, interactions, innovation, what have you. So if suddenly you reach the age of going to school at the age of 7 in Denmark, and you've never been to an institution, it's not a problem in itself, but it is a society problem. So that's one aspect of problems. Another aspect of problem is that, or challenges as we call it, yes, we are homogeneous, and when you're homogeneous, it's like being Danish, is that being Christian? Some would say. So there are all these challenges. How do we cope with, for example, X% of our immigrants, they might be Muslims, we're not used to that. What if they want to carry the foulard? All these things. But we've had a lot of focus on that because we realize it's an enormous resource. So it is, this is also just to be honest that it's not like, well, no problem, we just deal with this. It is a challenge, and it's a challenge that we are really trying to deal with. Now, I sense in the political landscape today, there is, of course, increasing. I think that was also the sense of one of the questions. Now that we have pressure on the welfare state, then do we have this discussion of welfare for whom? I find that is a little bit more if we have workers coming from Poland, for example, which is within the EU. And then there has been this enormous case in Denmark where it appeared that you could actually work in Denmark but have your children in Poland. You can cash the check for the children's paycheck, and they could send it back home. Should that be allowed? But also because we're so egalitarian, it's like same rules for everybody. So yes, I mean there are challenges, but that's part of being the system that we have to deal with it, and we try to do that. But it's definitely a political debate.
Great. Håkan?
Yeah, some short add-ons to this. Of course, I mean this debate is ever ongoing, and building a welfare system that looks into sort of was built actually upon from the general Swede. What did the general Swede expect when he got unemployed or whatever? I remember working at the court, and we looked into people who applied for social aid, and you have the right to have your own apartment paid, and you had the right to have a television, and expenses for food and all that, and in a Swede's view, okay, very, very, very basic, not much money to live upon at all. But coming from sort of a failing state that's been failing for like 20 years and getting an apartment with a television, I mean, that's luxury. So I think that to look into those issues has been debated much more, and also the level of how much welfare should be provided. And I think it's the discussion is ongoing, but at the same time, the general view that Sweden as a country will benefit from all the people that comes to Sweden is worth taking on. But there will be adjustments throughout the journey, clearly so. Yeah, and also coming into sort of, it's not only sort of Swedes that run into cultural I wouldn't say conflict, but turbulence when we meet people from other cultures and so on. It's also, we see cultures coming to Sweden and then, bringing up their children, and the children wants to live like the Swedes, and that's collide with the family values and so on. And we've seen some tragic events from that, young daughters being actually killed by their fathers because they live in improper life and they live the Swedish life. So there are challenges here, but in the long run, I think we're all moving in the right direction. Absolutely.
Tom, there was a question also on how Norway deals with the oil curse.
That's right. It's very true that the relatively high wages in the oil and gas sector has created an enormous pressure to increase salaries also in the mainland economy, as we say, the non-offshore economy. And that is a problem. We have not propped up salaries in other sectors to alleviate the differences. We rather try to sort of cap, I think, salaries in the oil and gas sector to reduce the pressure.
Good.
But we have a lot of Swedes working in Norway now because there's such a good salaries there.
That's true. You're very welcome.
I think there was one thing, well, at least I didn't respond to, and so you asked how to do it, doesn't it reduce incentives? And I think also it's fair to say that of course, that is a theme, that you should never have a system that reduces the incentive where it can better pay off to stay at home instead of going to work. That is a debate also going on now in Denmark, and therefore there's a tendency to slightly reduce tax on work. But we are talking about margins. We're never talking about, I mean, we're not questioning whether we should pay tax or not, because that's like a fundamental. We all want to do that because we believe in this redistribution. But of course there should be that incentive. So that's one thing I just want to share. But I also want to stress that nobody wants to live on welfare, and nobody can live on welfare. There is a group of the population which is a small group, and that is the group that does not get the education. I mean, even in our country, some fall out and don't really make it, even that we have an education system where we really believe that everybody should have that chance and everybody should be educated. So I guess 80% of has an education, but there are a few, and of course it's those that have a problem on the labor market. And should we, so they are the majority actually on the continuous welfare services. But for the rest, it's really something that creates, I think, this trust that Tormod was talking about, or this, that you don't feel stressed, that you feel, well, I'll not completely have to leave my house if I fall sick tomorrow, for example, and I get laid off. I will still have a possibility of maintaining my house, pay my mortgages, until I get a job, because that's the whole philosophy. It's to get your the next job. So that's why there is this with the flexible labor market. Yeah. I think, at least I would like to contribute, if that should be a perception that a welfare state is just somewhere where we live on welfare services and that can better pay off than having a proper job. It's not the case, and of course we can less, even if there was a slight tendency, that is definitely being reformed these years, because that's not what we want, that's not what we can afford, and well, yeah.
I wonder where the perception came from. Anyway, but it's true. But if you read everything about the Nordic countries, it's not the high, generous welfare benefits that make it distinctive. It's the active labor market policies. It's the very high labor force participation rates, especially of women, which are which are the highest in the world, and the very incredible emphasis on skilling and getting everybody into work. So we tend to focus on the high welfare benefits because that's such a contrast to us. But actually, what we should be focusing on is how do you get so many people to work and to stay in work and to do skilled work. That's the real miracle, as it were, although there's nothing miraculous about it. It's clever design and good government policy.
And that's also an advantage for the companies because it's much more flexible. Sometimes you have in also in some European countries where you have maybe it's impossible to
hire and fire.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, sir, you have a question? And maybe it has to be the last one, so because I realize time is running short. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for a great evening. My name is Nigel Na. I'm a high school teacher, so I find it very gratifying to hear from everyone that education is very important to your respective sectors. I have a question that pertains mostly to education. Especially, Your Excellency, Berit Bas, you mentioned the importance of creating some sort of empowerment up and down the entire hierarchy system. How does this work vis-a-vis education? Because when you have a large education infrastructure, there's a tendency for there to be a divide between policymakers versus your sort of ground level classroom teachers. How does that work in Denmark? How are teachers empowered to interact in this sort of innovative process? There was also mention of how education can contribute to a better educated polity people can participate in politics without the same problems of factionalism, excessive self-interest, right? They can participate in a sort of more enlightened way. I'm curious as to how that could happen and how we could help to bring that about. Because I think we have a generation now in Singapore that wants to be politically active, but we can also see the effects of some of that sentiment being mischanneled. So how can we help people become more politically active in a more responsible way through the education system? Thank you.
Wow, that's a good question. And I could almost suspect that you follow Danish news, because I think if you ask the Danish school teacher these days, they would say they don't feel very empowered, because there's just been a reform of the education system where we actually tried to break a little bit. We haven't talked about unionization, because another important element of the welfare state is that we have this
strong unions,
strong unions, etc.
Yeah.
So the reform actually had to break with some of the benefits, so you could say that teachers had achieved over the years, because we cannot afford to pay for it. Anyway, that was parenthesis. How do we empower teachers? If I can answer in a little bit more general terms, I think it might have to be something like that. It is like we empower everybody else. It's really giving them the responsibility within certain frames to plan and organize their teaching. The way it works in Denmark is that, of course, there are strategies, there are curricula to be achieved for every level, but there is a high degree of interpretation as to how should that be taught in the classroom. Now, when I say that Danish teachers are dissatisfied, it might be the same here, that the number of pupils are going up, hours are being reduced, and that sort of things. But in general, I would say it's that empowerment of deciding yourself of how you teach. You can be innovative, you can do different things with your classes. That might be one thing. I think there's another aspect, which is when it comes to a little bit higher education, there might be a higher degree of also giving responsibility to the students. That is not the responsibility of the teacher that they learn something. It's actually the other way around. And I think that, and I'm not saying this is particular to our countries, but I think it's very strong and quite fundamental, and sometimes also a challenge for us, that so much responsibility lies on the individual students that they have to look for the teaching, etc. Yeah.
On educated polities.
No, I think that, you know, in sort of a social science kind of subject is quite early on introduced in schools, and people, students are encouraged to be critical and to sort of read newspapers and criticize and discuss and all that. And of course we have also mock elections taking place at the school level and so on, to sort of familiarize people with the democratic process. But you know, I'm not saying that we have in all respects an educated polity, and this is a constant challenge, I think. And we also have people that are totally disinterested in politics. It's not like so this is a constant challenge, I think.
But it was very telling to me, you know, when Breivik happened, the response by the state and by the Norwegian people wasn't, you know, we need harsher laws and stiffer punishments and greater enforcement against, you know, psychos, but that we reinforce our Norwegian values of freedom, and it's very inspiring.
I think so too, and it came as a surprise, I think, to many how strong that reaction was. That, you know, this only tells us that, you know, open society and tolerance is the only sort of solid ground for us to take.
Indeed so. Final comments or responses?
It's just interesting to, I mean, teachers' sort of environment, and it's ever ongoing discussion in Sweden, and you know, it's in the salaries going down for teachers in general, and now you know, everybody is pouring in money to to the teachers. But you know, everything takes time, and I think that the adjustments will take some time. But I mean, we had a Swedish school board here in Singapore, looking how you do it, how you find the incentives for the teachers and so on. But then also coming back to sort of the democracy issue of the society, it's not without challenges. You know, we see in Sweden today, I don't know how it is in Norway and in Denmark, but we see that it tends to be lesser and lesser people that engage in civil society. You know, they are not members of parties in the extent they used to be. They are not taking on the role as you know, be the coach of the children's soccer team in the same. So the engagement from the people is declining in that sense, and that maybe has to do with, you know, the amount of hours that everybody puts into the work. I mean, it's an interesting balance to see that, because it is. I think that all our political systems are very heavily dependent of that people are engaged in taking a stand and do the discussions and so on. And then I was also just to add on to what you said earlier, that I mean the discussion also about the welfare system. That's really one part of it, but the other very important part is, okay, how do we make our society successful sort of on the global market to be able to have those welfare system, and that I must say is less discussed in Sweden, and I suppose it's similar situation in our neighboring country, and it should be a lively debate on, you know, how do we get more Swedes to take on the challenges of moving your company to this region, for instance. But eventually, hopefully, those kinds of discussion will arrive as well.
It's very gratifying to know you're also having those debates about competitiveness, growth. It's not just about,
we do.
You know,
That's the main debate.
Indeed, so
It's growth and employment.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure you know you all agree with me that it's been incredibly insightful. I mean, when we think about how the Singapore model should adapt, should evolve in the next 50 years, you know, plenty of great examples outside of Singapore to look at, whether it's on democracy or whether it's on social inclusion or on pension reform or on how we create more inclusive, participatory, cohesive societies. And finally, it leaves me really just to thank our three distinguished speakers for spending all this time with us.